It is beyond dispute that a healthy nation is indeed a productive nation. You're watching Bizweek with me, Winston Mavora, on this lovely evening. And today we will be talking issues to do with nutrition, which is a significant contributor to the issue of a healthy lifestyle. And my guest on the program this evening is a gentleman from Civil Society Scaling Up Nutrition, and he is the country coordinator, and his name is Mr. Matthews Muru. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, and good evening, viewers.
Okay, so today we'll be looking at particularly the Global Nutrition Report. And just to kickstart this conversation, first of all, how did Zambia, fare according to the report?
Okay, so Zambia is not performing very well. Unfortunately, Zambia, I think that if you look at the nutrition indicators as well as just the report itself, you'd realize that Zambia is actually not making any serious progress the way we would want to perform. And for your own information, Zambia is considered to be an alarming country when it comes to nutrition, because it has stunting rates that are almost half all the number of children that we have in the country that are under the age of 2. So that is a really serious situation that we're in.
0966651218 is the number you can call to be part and parcel of this particular discussion as we wrap up the year that looks at something that is very important, something that is actually very familiar with each and every human being, which is the issue of nutrition. Now, you've talked about the issue of stunting, and to some people, it may sound like, very fancy and something that is, but I would like you to break it a little bit further.
Okay.
Just, what is this stunting,
Okay, so thank you for that question, and actually you are right. Many people would be hearing of big words like stunting, and they're wondering what stunting
They think it doesn't affect them.
It doesn't affect them, and actually they might actually have a stunted child in their home. So stunting simply refers to, the lack of adequate growth when it comes to cognitive development, as well as also the immune system if it hasn't adequately developed to its full capacity, as well as also when it comes to the physical growth in itself. You'd find a child who's 5 years old and they're looking like they're 2 or 3. So that is also some of the effects of stunting. So stunting is, in a layman's language, the lack of proper growth, whether cognitive development, the immune system, as well as the physical growth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, it's I really love the fact that we need to bring this home. So when you talk about the issue of cognitive development, obviously you are talking about you've noticed that sometimes people often say that in the past people used to be very intelligent, they used to perform well at school compared to nowadays. So part of the reason why we've seen that there could be such cases is as a result of that lack of proper development.
Yes, you are very right on that. The lack of, proper development, if a child is stunted, they would not, adequately compete with their fellow pupils, let's say in class, who have, received good nutrition. So when you talk about the effects of stunting, you would actually see, even in the passing rates. Look at some parts of Zambia, for example, and look at the way, the pupils from those areas are performing, and you would actually realize that, stunting has had some negative effects in those areas, because, some parts of the country, for example, the Northern Province. The Northern Province is one area that is worst hit by malnutrition in Zambia. And look at the quality of, or just the pass rate for the Northern Province. I know last year there was some bit of improvement, but I think in the past it was that bad. So you would actually equate stunting to performance at school, to also development of the different areas where, the children that are stunted would be based.
Okay. Now, what role does nutrition play in economic development?
Okay, so when I mentioned the fact that, stunting denies you of an opportunity to adequately or to fairly compete with children that have, received good nutrition, it means that, you have challenges when it comes to learning. So when children have challenges when it comes to learning, it means that, they they would not progress in the academic life to probably go to university and become the engineers, become the doctors, become, all these professions that would want to see. And by so doing, you have a lot of people that would have dropped out of school. And you look at the kind of jobs that such kind of people would have, they would definitely work as, laborers or doing the manual kind of work or burning charcoal, and the jobs that would not really bring that kind of dignity to a family and a particular household. So with that, it means that that particular area is denied of economic development, because such a person would not meaningfully help the family when it comes to also just raising finances and contributing to the family's welfare. So nutrition plays a huge role. It plays a huge role because it's supposed to, proper nutrition should give you the right to fairly, participate in education, economic development, and it goes beyond just health. I think in the past we've seen a situation where, nutrition is just seen as a health issue when it's not.
Okay. Now, I know that Zambia apparently, is being guided by its blueprint for development, which is the Seventh National Development Plan.
Yes.
And, everything that we do is anchored on that particular strategic and important document. Does the 7 NDP adequately cover issues to do with nutrition?
Yeah, I think the seventh National Development Plan covers nutrition quite well, because you've noticed that, they've put, clusters. So you're not just, performing or undertaking, the different activities that have to be implemented in silos, but you have to do it as a cluster. So nutrition in the seventh National Development Plan, I think it's well covered. The only challenge that we're having is implementation. So we're good at making plans, but when it comes to actual implementation of these good plans that we have, that's where we're failing.
So what would you recommend then be done to ensure that this gap is bridged?
So my recommendation is that, when we have proper plans like the seventh National Development Plan, one of the things that has to be put in place is the fact that you have to look at the implementation itself. And apart from implementation, you also have to look at the resources that have to be, channeled to the plans for them to effectively work, as well as also the human resource. I'll tell you that Zambia has a huge human resource gaps when it comes to nutrition. Every health facility should have at least a trained personnel that should guide that catchment area on issues to do with nutrition. Because when you look at nutrition, apart from just the government side where they're supposed to provide some sort of service delivery as well as also providing information, there's the behavioral part that, the household has to also play a role. You would notice that, there are certain foods, the way they're prepared in Zambia. I'll talk about okra, for example. You would add soda, right? Soda takes away all the nutrients that, are supposed to benefit from that particular food. You talk about chikanda. You put soda again, which would take away all those nutrients that you're supposed to benefit from that particular food. Food should provide our bodies, apart from just filling our stomach, it should provide our bodies with the necessary nutrients that our body requires for it to develop as effectively as it can be. So the behavioral part, requires some sort of personnel that would reinforce the messaging to ensure that the communities can get, the best information, as well as also just for behavioral change to take place.
Okay. 0966651218 is the number that you simply have to call to be part and parcel of this particular discussion that is focused on the Nutrition Global Report. And from a Zambian context, of course, we're looking at the issues to do with nutrition and, of course, the diet patterns that various Zambians are involved in. Now, is nutrition receiving the adequate funding?
No. And I say no because, it's an insult for nutrition, for almost 95% of the nutrition budget being funded by donors. We've seen a situation like in the social cash as well as in the Ministry of Education where I think donors had issues and they froze the funding, that those particular sectors were actually I think they were affected so negatively. Talk about the cash, the social cash transfers, that people would not receive social cash until probably next year. So, in an event that the donors decide to withhold, the nutrition funding, then a lot of people will die as a result of malnutrition. And the stunting rates, and as well as also all the other types of malnutrition, will actually increase in Zambia. So that is a situation that we don't want to see. As a country, we would need to see the government taking up, that they have to own the challenges that Zambians are facing and try to address them by putting, enough resources, as well as also just putting in efforts to just change the situation.
Okay.
Because as it is now, uh it's not. It's not even anywhere
Okay,
near.
so there was a conference, I think, this year.
Yes.
An international conference whose
Yes.
focus was nutrition, and I remember very well. I think the president actually graced that occasion, if I'm correct. If not, he must have been represented by the vice
It's the
president.
vice president. Yes.
Exactly, the vice president did represent the president, and there were commitments that were made, after that particular conference.
Yes.
Now, what I would like to find out is how far with the implementation of those commitments.
So, actually, it's good that you brought up that issue. We had what we were calling the nutrition. It was supposed to be a nutrition conference, but it was changed for some reason, because I think of the magnitude of this particular event. So it was called the Nutrition Summit, which attracted, I think, a lot of people that came from all over the world just to come and help us with this, and also just come and demonstrate what is working in other countries and other regions that probably Zambia would have to similar, or just to replicate, or follow suit, or learn from other countries. And we even had the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement coordinator, who's an assistant to the UN Secretary General, come to Zambia and be part of this event, because I think there was a lot of excitement at global level looking at the initiative that Zambia had taken. And I think just some few weeks prior to that event, we saw the Vice President, Honorable Inongewina, being chosen as the nutrition champion for Zambia, which excited everybody. And I think at that particular event, one of the commitments that came from government was actually to do with nutrition funding. Government made a commitment where they're supposed to allocate to nutrition per child 400 kwacha per child each year. And if you calculate the number of children that we have in the country, we have about, that are under the age of 2, there should be about 3.5 million. So with that, there was a lot of excitement, and we were just trying to see how government was going to take up that leadership role, as well as just owning the problem that we have, and allocating enough funds to nutrition. I think with that 400 kwacha per child commitment, Zambia would have depended less on the donor funding that goes to nutrition, and would have seen the government taking up, the leadership role, as well as also.
So how much is the government currently allocating
16
per
kwacha,
child?
which is probably enough to buy 1 liter of fuel, and that's for the whole year. So the 400 kwacha really gave us hope. And I think at that particular point, for us as the Civil Society Scaling Up Nutrition Alliance, we tried by all means to engage every key stakeholder in the budget making process to ensure that we don't lose, this vision, as well as this commitment, and had engagements at different levels. But for obvious reasons, we know that I think part of the budget for Zambia had to service, the debt and other things that got huge chunks, and we saw that nutrition did not really receive the amount of money that it's supposed to receive.
Okay. So in other words, you are acknowledging that the current, debt for Zambia is actually having an impact on nutrition as well.
It's a challenge. Because I think, had it not been for the debt, we would have seen a different picture. Because government played, by them taking up, like the vice president taking up the leadership role and being the political champion for nutrition in Zambia, and her giving a directive, through cabinet to the different line ministries that are supposed to budget for nutrition, which excited everybody because I think there was some information that went to the different line ministries to budget for nutrition. But the end result was what was depressing because we noticed that, most of the monies was going to things that were not part of the budget, I think, in the years before.
Okay. Now, after, giving those interesting statistics on how Zambia is actually faring with regards to nutrition, obviously one would want to know, maybe from a regional perspective, southern region, how are we doing?
We might even be the worst because Zambia has got stunting rates of like 40%. And if you look at the report, the Food and Nutrition Security Report that was released by FAO just for 2017, I think Zambia should be in Southern Africa, should have been second last. Yeah. So even other countries like Zimbabwe, they're coming from an economic situation, an economic crisis, but you'd see that, they would have stunting rates of 28%, which is bad, but it's way better than Zambia.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that in the last 5 years, Zambia has made some progress because we moved from 46% to 40%. But if you look at the amount of resources that have gone in and the amount of just the effort that have gone in to reduce the high rates, the alarming rates of malnutrition in Zambia, most of that funding wise was donors that took the bigger role. And to some extent, we did not really see other sectors owning this problem. I'll tell you, one of the key sectors is the ministry, the agricultural sector, for instance, because you would agree with me that people have diverted from the food that they used to eat, and that is also a huge challenge because most people would rather grow maize because they know that at the end of it all, they would receive inputs, they would receive fertilizers, and the FRA would actually go to places such as Kaputa to come and buy your maize. So you had support from the input side, and you're getting support also from the market side. So if we would have seen, if we had a situation where diverse foods, different foods that actually contribute very well or contribute more to our nutrition, then would have had a different picture altogether.
Talking about the issue of a crop or maybe food or diet, to be specific,
Yes.
diet diversification, obviously it has been revealed that, the diet pattern of the majority of Zambians is that of a mono nature.
Yes.
There's this significant inclination to Nshima. But don't you think that maybe Nshima is the most affordable? For the majority of the Zambians that are watching us right now, obviously they would argue and say, well, Nshima is what is affordable, is what we've grown up with, is what has kept us up to where we are, is what, kept our grandfathers and grandmothers and those before them as well.
But you'd also agree with me that our grandfathers and our grandmothers, they would grow millet, they would grow cassava, they would grow, different, apart from just having the Nshima. Nshima, yes, would be some sort of staple, but they would grow all these other varieties that they would eat. I remember growing up and my grandma would prepare, they would boil the beans, they would give us groundnuts, they would give us, the sorghum, the millet, and the other foodstuffs that would eat back then, which we're not seeing now.
Okay, so on that same thing of, on that same point of diet diversification, which I find very interesting, in the event of these, supermarket chain malls that we're seeing mushrooming every corner of, city centers, and, those supermarkets are coming with fast food restaurants.
Yes.
And you discover that maybe Hungry Lion is cheap. Hungry Lion maybe would cost you about 25 kwacha. You have yourself a good pack that would, give you that energy that would last you a day, compared to some of these, diversified diets due to the cost. Don't you think that that's also a hindrance?
It is a hindrance, and I'll tell you that, most businesses are actually profit-driven. So whenever, people like, the private sector sees profits, they would go for that particular or that kind of business. But what we don't realize as consumers, we don't take interest to know what we are eating and to also know what we're supposed to eat. I don't know whether you know that your daily requirements for sugar as a man. You of all the food that you're
Yeah.
going to eat, of all the beverages that you're going to eat in that particular like in a day, you're not supposed to consume more than 9 teaspoons of sugar. So just imagine if you get a beverage that is so high in sugar that would have probably 14 teaspoons of sugar in it. You drink it, you've over, gone your what you require in that particular day, and by so doing, you'd actually realize that we are creating a huge problem. By the non-communicable diseases are actually on the rise. There are foods that are so much that have a lot of fat, foods that have a lot of salt, and food that have a lot of sugar. So these are actually killing us as fast as we shouldn't actually be dying.
Okay. So as we get to wrap up this conversation, Matthews, which is very, very interesting and which I find very dear.
Yes.
is,
I think we need to have this conversation
more, yeah.
so that we can.
But as we wrap
discuss-
up, what are some of the recommendations that you would give that would ensure that there is some improvements on some of the setbacks that you've highlighted as we were discussing this particular issue of nutrition?
Okay, so I think to me my number one recommendation is that government really has to look at nutrition as a health issue as well as an economic issue, and an issue that would affect education. So we need a multi-sectoral approach in addressing the challenges of nutrition. We need to see a lot of sectors taking part and owning this challenge that we have with regards to the triple burden of malnutrition. We need to see the agricultural sector, we need to see the education sector, we need to see the health sector, the economic sector playing a role in changing this particular situation, because at the end of it all, if we change the malnutrition, if we reduce the rate of malnutrition in Zambia, would actually benefit the country, because would have economic development at the end of it all.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming through to Bizweek.
Thank
Matthews.
you. I'm looking forward to another conversation.
Definitely, we will create time. This has been Bizweek, and today we're looking at the Global Nutrition Report. And Matthews from the Civil Society Scaling Up Nutrition was actually giving us some perspectives on where Zambia is actually at international level as well as at the regional level with regards efforts being exerted to improve the issue to do with nutrition. Now remember, nutrition affects each and every one of us, whether despite of class, race, or indeed social status. All of us are affected by this particular issue of nutrition, and indeed interesting statistics have been shared on how Zambia is performing, especially at regional level. Going forward, we hope to see more resources being pumped in this particular important facet of economic development. If Zambia is to become a middle-income prosperous nation by 2030, indeed the country must be healthy. And when we talk about healthy, it means nutritious diets must be observed. This is Winston Mavoro, and you've been watching Bizweek. Have a lovely evening.